when I lived in London, it was okay to go and work in a studio in London because it would be 20 minutes, half an hour for me to go to visit another studio. But when I went to live out in the countryside in England in 1975, it was easier for me to take the studio to my home. So I built a mobile studio in a truck, and that we took that to record some 2 albums in Monte Carlo in 1975 and 76, and I would bring it to my home and record and do the mixing of albums in the truck, just parked next to my house. And although I built some studios in London too in 78, I sold those in 1983 and built a studio at home, a fixed studio. Because 1982, 83, that was the year when it began to become possible to have professional quality of equipment without having to spend crazy money. Things were becoming much more affordable. And today, even more so. Today, you can buy a computer, you can buy the things you need to make a record for, 3, 4, 5,000 euros. And people make hit records at home in their bedroom. But back in 1983, it was the beginning. And so I sold my London studios and transferred things to home, and I'm used to being I'm like a painter. A painter goes to work as an artist. He will walk into a studio. He doesn't want to have other people there. It's just him and a canvas and privacy and obsession, focus, concentration. He doesn't need someone there to make the tea. He doesn't need someone there to clean his brushes or mix the paint. An artist works alone, a painter. And I'm like that as a musician. I like to work alone as much as possible. So when I'm working with the other musicians, that's different because, of course, we have to play together as a band. But for the particularly the work of mixing, and I work alone. So this is unusual for me. I'm working with other people here, and it's good because I get to hear their ideas and the way they interpret the music. So sometimes it's good to learn to play in a team again, as opposed to being selfish and just doing it your own way. So this is an interesting opportunity to work with other people, and today has been interesting, and to me a little relief because I don't know how this sounded. It was 3 months ago or 2.5 months ago when we recorded this music, and so now after 2 or 3 months I've forgotten what the show sounded like, and so I was a little nervous coming in here this morning that maybe it wouldn't be sounding too good, but it sounds okay. It's good. I'm pleased with the end result. So we did okay.
Good old Blackpool.
It's something I haven't recorded in that way, but I've been working with orchestral musicians since 1968. It was the first time I worked with a very small orchestra, a string quartet, but we double-tracked them, so we sounded like more people playing. So my relationship with orchestral music goes back a long way, and I've used orchestral musicians on many Jethro Tull records over the years. But to record a live concert, it was the first time we worked with an orchestra to record it. But during the last 4 years, I've done quite a few orchestral concerts. This was just the time to make a record, to record it for posterity. So. And it's always difficult when you decide we will record the show on the 10th of December 2004. Then you have to make that plan many weeks before, because you have to get the permissions of the venue, you have to book the musicians, you have to to the production, not only of the concert, but also getting the cameraman, the audio recorded. It's something you have to plan. You commit yourself to that show. And of course, when you've done it, you always think, damn, we should have recorded last night or the night afterwards. You always think, oh, we picked the wrong night. It was better yesterday, or it will be better tomorrow. That's always going to happen whenever you record any live thing. So it's always a lot of pressure on the day when you make that decision and you're going to record at that particular place, and everybody is very nervous. The orchestra, the musicians, we go to perform to the audience, but in our heads we're thinking, damn, there are cameras here, there's someone is recording this, and you're a little bit more tense and are not as relaxed as you would normally be. So it's always difficult working under those circumstances to combine live music with a recorded moment, which may not be the best one. There were, I'm sure, other concerts on that little tour where I think we all played better. But this is the one we got, and it's better than I thought it was going to be, because I'm always going to be critical of particularly my own performance, thinking I could have done that better. But it's okay, and it's live, and it's real, and it's the way it was. And I think looking at it, it's not the best performance, but it's a typical real live performance that I'm happy to be judged by. And somewhere you just have to say, okay, that's the best we could do on that day, and there are some little imperfections, but maybe I'm the only person who hears it. Maybe somebody else just think, why is he getting crazy about that? That sounds fine to me. I'm always going to hear those little things that aren't right. Anytime, any night. For me, there is no perfection. I know every night I go on stage, I will make 5, 7, 10 wrong notes. I will never play a perfect concert. I will always play some wrong notes. It's going to happen to me every night. I just have to accept that and try to make sure they're not the same wrong 5 notes as last night. I try and find a different 5 notes to play wrong. At least it keeps me interested. So there's no such thing as perfection. I'm never going to get a perfect concert where I think, wow, I was really, really great. What I will think is, I was really great for that 10 seconds. I was great. The next 20 seconds were, and then there's 5 seconds where I am really bad, terrible. So every concert, every song, it's not you can't just say it was all good or it was all bad. There are little moments within it when some great, wonderful, passionate, wonderful moments, and then something bad happens. And then you have to make yourself try that little harder, and you get back on track, get back on focus. It's like Michael Schumacher driving a race. The whole race is never perfect. There will be some moments where he nearly loses it, some moments where he didn't quite get the line into a corner, some moments where he braked a little too early or a little too late. The race is not perfect. The race is a series of brilliant moments and moments where it wasn't so good, but you look at the end result, he won the Grand Prix, so it was a great race. Even though there are moments in that race where he's going to be really angry with himself that he didn't quite get the car set up right for a corner. There's no such thing as a perfect race, except in the sense you win the race. And for me, there's no such thing as a perfect concert, except for the fact I get to the end of it and nobody asks for their money back. That's the equivalent of winning the Grand Prix.
Now. Skating away, skating away, skating away on a thin ice of a new day.
There are people, particularly singers, who I really envy. People who are just born with this wonderful talent, and it doesn't seem to be difficult. They make it look really easy and really natural. And if there was one thing that if I could have any talent in the world, then I think it would be to be born with not a perfect voice, just a voice it was easy for me to sing. But I've never been a good singer. I've never been a great singer. I started singing when I was 17 or 18 years old, only because the other guys in the band were even worse than I was. I was the only one who could sing even a little bit, so I got the job. And since then, I've been the guy who's the singer. But it's not something I feel is easy. I never found it easy to sing. And I wish I had that talent, that when I hear other people sing, it seems like they're not having to try too hard. You know, if I listen to Sting, you know, it sounds like he's got this very natural voice, and he doesn't have to try so hard. It just comes out sounding good. And there are some times when I have to say I've worked with some people who I've heard them on record and thought they were fantastic. And then when I work with them in person and I realize that they, like me, are not perfect, they have to try very, very hard in the studio to make that best performance, and maybe live they are not so good. So I kind of understand from both ways of thinking. You know, sometimes in the studio we can do our very best, but it's very hard to recreate that live on stage. I won't mention the names of other singers, but I know from personal experience this happens to other singers. But there are other people who... Jack Bruce is an example of someone who, until he was ill last year, I worked with him, 2 years ago, and he's an old guy. He's older than me, but he'd kept this beautiful voice, and he could walk in and sing first take. It's perfect. Everything, phrasing, pitch, emotion. It would just be so. It sounds so easy for him to do, and I envy that talent to be able to do that. And I hope when our friends Cream get together again very soon now to do their concerts at the Albert Hall, which is a pretty scary proposition if you haven't played together since 1969. It will be really interesting to be there and listen to it. And I won't be, because I'll be in Sydney, Australia, playing a concert then, so I won't get to see Jack and Eric and Ginger doing their reunion. So I'll read about it in the papers. Hope it all goes well for them. But Jack's a lucky guy. He's got this real talent as a singer who doesn't sound like everybody else, has a special, unique quality, and it's his own voice. He's not imitating American accents. He's not imitating a way of singing that has become obligatory. The way so many people have to sing their songs as if they come from somewhere in Middle America. It happens with German artists too. They sing in English, they have to copy an American accent. Why? Sing in English with a German accent. That's much more sexy. But over here, German artists feel that if they sing in English, they must not sound like they're German. Otherwise, other German people will hear the accent and laugh at them if they have a German English accent. But forget that. If you want international success, you're going to have it if you sound interesting. You won't sound interesting if you just sound like another American artist. It's much better to sound like you're from Europe. Have a stronger regional, national accent. Sing in English, but let people know where you're from. That's more interesting. To be brave. And it took me, when I was a teenager, I had to make a conscious decision to try and sing with an American voice or to sing with my own voice. And I decided I had to sing in my own voice and not pretend to be American. But why does Mick Jagger, Elton John, Rod Stewart, the list is endless of people who sing in this crazy American accent, and yet their natural speaking voice is completely different. To me, that's like being a bad actor, I don't understand why they feel they have to do that. But that's what they do, and I'm not saying they're wrong, just difficult for me. I wouldn't want to do that. I want to sound like me, and I want to play like me, even if it's not everybody's preference. I think individuality is the most important thing in music. Even if you're not perfect, at least you don't sound like everybody else. And I think I don't sound like everybody else. I sound sometimes much worse than everybody else, but at least I'm sounding like me. So as a singer, I have my limitations, but I'm happy with the limitations so long as I feel it, I have my identity intact. But yeah, I would love to have been a great singer. And if I wasn't a great singer, I would have loved to have been a great guitar player. But I was never going to be a great guitar player, so I decided to play the flute instead. Because Eric Clapton can't play the flute. Jimi Hendrix couldn't play the flute. Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, terrible flute players. So I thought, the flute, I'm in with a chance here. And somewhere along the line in 1972, Peter Gabriel, I just saw this on a TV program the other night. Peter Gabriel, I didn't know Genesis back then, because we were all working somewhere else. I never saw Genesis or listened to their early albums. But I just saw this on television, and Peter Gabriel is playing a flute in 1972. And people must have said to him, "Oh, wow, yeah, Ian Anderson, is the flute player in rock." He didn't seem to carry on playing the flute. And I think that I've put off a lot of people from playing the flute. People who probably would have liked to play the flute were going to get compared to me, because it's okay with guitar players. There's lots of guitar players. Having another one doesn't hurt. But if Ian Anderson, the flute player in rock music, if somebody else came along to be another flute player in rock music, people would be always saying, "Oh, you're copying Ian Anderson," or which must be a pain. So I think that's the reason that after all these years, there are still no internationally successful, known flute players in rock music. After 36 years, I'm still the only guy really doing the flute in the context of rock, blues, folk, classic, whatever it is, that mixture of music which is Jethro Tull, which is kind of strange. I would have thought somebody would have come to their senses and thought, there's a lot of money in playing the flute if you get it right. I would have thought someone would have tried to have taken my crown from me and become the flute player. But so far it hasn't happened, and I think I have a few years left of being the only internationally known flute player. I know there have been other flute players, but I know I'm the top of the heap in flute playing terms. Not that that's important, but it's again a feeling of individuality. I feel this is my special bit of territory. I planted my flag on the moon. This is my space. I still have my space. I think it's obviously classical music is part of the big history of music. It's it represents a period where some great men and some women have become at the peak of their artistic profession. The great composers of the world are. It's impossible for me to believe in 1,000 years or in 2,000 years' time people will still worship Beethoven and Mozart and Bach. They will always be considered very, very, very important in the world of music. But so will the great moments of jazz. And jazz is a phenomenon which really we're talking about a 50-year period of really important music called jazz. We're talking about, with blues music, we're talking not even 50 years of really important blues music. With rock music, in its broadest sense, we talk about 50 years of rock music. I think probably 40 years of important rock music. But classical music spans a period of arguably, 200 years of great music. So it's perhaps something that is very rich and full of detail and full of great people with great compositions and great performances. But I think we also we should be investigating the best of blues, the best of jazz, the best of folk music, which has been carried down through the generations in the really only in the last 50 years has folk music been well recorded for us to listen to. Even though some of the melodies and traditional lyrics are hundreds of years old, it's still a phenomenon which is, it's because it was never really written down. It was just played. We only have, from the beginning of recorded technology, we only have that reference point. With classical music, it was all written, orchestrated. In the time of Bach, it was still all written out. So we preserved not recordings, but we preserved on paper the blueprint, the engineering diagram to recreate that 100 or 200 or 300 years later. Whereas with blues and jazz and folk music, we rely, because that music was never written down, or not usually written down, we rely on the recorded history for, I suppose, something like 60, 70 years at the outside, but most of the good recordings, we're talking probably 40 or 50 years old. It was just kind of a different perspective on things. So, but yeah, people go towards classical music to find the best of that genre. People will listen to rock music of the 60s and 70s to find the best of that genre, to learn about what it is that made up the history of the music that they hear today on MTV or on their radio. So people of 15 years old or 20 years old, many of them will be listening to today's rock bands, but will also know about Led Zeppelin, will also know about The Who and the Stones and Pink Floyd. These are very important parts of rock music as a genre. And so it's crazy for someone who likes The Darkness. They have an obligation to go back and listen to Led Zeppelin and Queen. It's important they do that, so they realize The Darkness, who are a great rock band, but it's not entirely original music. It comes very strongly from music of the early 70s. And I think, we all benefit from listening, sometimes going back in history, sometimes just taking a sideways look at other kinds of music. And for me to do Jethro Tull's music or my own music with an orchestral accompaniment is just taking another look at those songs and those structures to perhaps present them in a slightly different way and consider them again. Sometimes pieces of music I may have written 30 years ago, I can play them on stage with Jethro Tull as rock songs, or I can play them on my own as an acoustic song, or I can do it with an orchestra and play it in an orchestral arrangement. So there are different ways to take that song idea and look at it from a different angle, different perspective. Just as Monet painted many pictures of water lilies. He didn't just paint one. He thought, that's good, but I think I'm going to just do it again. Different light, different day, different brush. I'm going to do it again. Look at it another way. Cézanne did the same thing with the same views of Mont Saint-Victoire. He painted it, same mountain, but from different angles and different lights on different times of the year. Not because he was looking for perfection. He was just felt that subject needed more than one painting to look at it in its full context. And so it is with music too. There are times when I need to take a song, try that song a different way. It's not a better way, it's just a different way, to take another look at that idea of lyrics, of melody, of harmony, to reconstruct it, but to change the shape a little bit. It's an important part of not getting old, becoming mature as a musician, is to be able to look at some of your early work and reconsider it, to use it as a benchmark, as a measuring stick for what you're doing today and what you might do tomorrow. So I don't have a problem playing some of my old songs because I'm very happy with some of those songs, but it's nice to try them sometimes in a different way. I know there are some artists who have a lot of difficulty playing their hit. They get bored with playing it, 2,000 times or something. I believe Page and Plant, Robert Plant, didn't want to do Stairway to Heaven. He just didn't want to sing that song again. For many of us, we think it's a great Led Zeppelin classic. We can't understand why would he not want to do that. But that's the artist's decision. He didn't feel right about it, so he shouldn't do it. And there are some of my songs I feel that way about too, that I prefer not to play. They don't mean the same thing to me anymore. But luckily, they're not songs that are the biggest favourites. They are sometimes songs that may have done quite well, but they're not. To leave them aside isn't going to upset too many people. I'm happy with most of what I've done over the years. But then, of course, we made a lot more records than Led Zeppelin did, so we have more to choose from. Maybe that's the answer. It's always the first 10 minutes of rehearsal when the orchestra sit down and I walk onto the stage and our conductor says hello and we introduce each other. There are 10 minutes of suspicion, of tension. And you can make that turn into something positive, or maybe it could just be really a negative thing all the way through the next 8 hours, whatever you're rehearsing. So you have to really, in that first 10 minutes, try and use the tension in a positive way. And so when we rehearse, we have to find mutual respect, a concern to do our best, and to learn about each other's ways of playing. Because no two people play alike. With every orchestra is different to another orchestra, so we have to learn that very quickly, to find a relationship. And it's a bit like in India, they have arranged marriages, where the father and mother will decide that their son should marry that girl, and that seems like it's a bad idea. But when that guy and that girl get together, they may not immediately find an easy relationship. They don't really like each other, or they have nothing in common, but they have to make it work. And it's just the same thing when we do an orchestral show. It's like an arranged marriage. We have committed ourselves to doing a show with each other, and we have to learn to make the marriage work. We have to make it work, because in 24 hours' time, we will be playing it live in front of an audience. We have to make it work. And so it takes both sides to make it work. And we try to do that I think probably usually early on in the rehearsal, we try and give the orchestra one or two more difficult pieces to play, because it's important they understand this is not an easy ride, that they are going to be challenged by some of the music. But we also don't want to make it too difficult at the beginning and intimidate them. But we have to give them a standard and say, okay, this is not going to be, maybe you just think playing the it's just going to be, they realize suddenly they actually have to play, there's some difficult rhythmic music going on, and orchestrations and balances that have to be achieved within the orchestra. So we let them know this is not going to be too easy, but we don't want to make it sound too hard and frighten them too early in rehearsal. Plenty of time for that later in rehearsal. But again, there are times when maybe we will sit and make a change in the orchestration, because sometimes some individual in the orchestra may find something a little difficult to understand, and so we have to try and explain it a different way. Or sometimes we change the actual musical part and make it easier for them to play. Sometimes it's very difficult, for instance, for the flute player in the orchestra who has to join me for a duet, and we play together. And usually the flute player is very nervous. He or she shouldn't be nervous, because they're much better flute players than I am. But they maybe feel a little intimidated because they have to come and stand at the front of the stage and play with me a piece of music that I may have played 50 times before. It's their first time playing that piece of music. And they get very nervous. And so I think that's a special moment when I have to try to learn the skills of being supportive and friendly and helpful, and try and make them feel relaxed, and not to worry if they make a mistake, not to worry if it's not perfect. the more important thing is that they enjoy those 3 minutes when they're standing at the front of the stage with a spotlight on them, being a soloist. That's important to me, that at the end of the show, they go away feeling good, that they enjoyed that 3 minutes of nervousness, So I have to learn these skills. I'm still learning how to do that, because I'm not usually a great... I'm not a good mother figure. But I'm having to find my feminine side and sometimes be a motherly, sort of helpful, supportive character to nervous musicians who are not used to coming to stand at the front with me. Not just the flute players, the woodwind players have to come down, and sometimes we have a solo violinist will join us for a song, and you can sense the nervousness and tension when they have to step out of the safety zone of the orchestra and come down to the front. Because not every musician wants to be a soloist. Most orchestral musicians are perfectly happy to stay in the orchestra. And then you find a James Galway, who left the Berlin Philharmonic and von Karajan to be a soloist, which was a pretty dangerous move, from being the principal flautist in the most famous orchestra in the world, with the most famous and great conductor in the world. He decided to leave and to be a soloist, special kind of personality, special character. He was successful. But not every musician wants to do that. It's a very big risk to leave the safety of the orchestra and go out as a soloist into the world. So I can understand why they get nervous sometimes doing that. But I enjoyed playing with these folks. There's a lot of them they weren't all young. Some of them were older, maybe not as old as me, but they were a mixture of ages and from different levels of experience. And I think that's kind of nice in an orchestra, that it's not just one age group of the same people with all the same set of rules and understandings. So the orchestra's much more complex. There are some people who are a little new to it, some people who've been doing it for a long time. Some of them are music teachers when they're not playing in the orchestra. Some of them are waitresses in a bar. I mean, there could be anything, because it's hard to make a living just from being a musician. And even in the great orchestras of the world, like the London Symphony Orchestra or the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, some of those musicians are always trying to find some extra work to do to try and make a little more money, to be comfortable, because you don't get paid much money working in an orchestra. Tough world. So it's kind of nice for me to work with these people, and sometimes I would want to kill them. Sometimes they probably would like to kill me first. But at the end of the show, we're always really, there's a great feeling of when you complete a show together, It's always a really, really warm feeling when musicians who are different to you, with different experiences, you come together in this wonderful way. It's an arranged marriage that ends in making babies together on stage. In a kind of a way. If I'm making a solo album, which I've not done very often, I think 4 times in 36 years, then I am doing it for me. I'm not worried about other musicians. I'm just writing songs. The song is the important thing, or the tune, whatever it is. That's important. I don't have to worry about making the drummer happy, or I don't have to worry about, there being interesting things for a keyboard player to play or electric guitar. The song is the only important thing. So I can be completely selfish in the way that I write, arrange, and ultimately perform those songs. And if I decide I want a bass player, then I find a bass player, or I play it myself. If I decide I want some keyboards or accordion, then I find somebody to play that. I don't have to worry about committing myself to specific actual musicians. But if I'm writing music and recording music with Jethro Tull, I have to do it partly for those other guys. So I have to be thinking, here's a piece of music. Will Martin Barr enjoy playing this? Because it's important that I think he's enjoying it. I want to know at the end of it that he had a good time, that he felt he was able to put his spirit, his ideas, his technical ability into this piece of music and feel good about it. So when I'm writing music for Jethro Tull, I'm thinking about the other guys. When I'm doing a concert, I'm thinking about me first, the other guys second, and third, I'm thinking about the audience. I do think about the audience, but it's not the priority. And I always believe that the audience will enjoy it more if I am having a good time. So it's important first that I'm really getting a lot out of this concert. I think that will convey itself to the through the music and the body language. The audience will see that and they will enjoy it too. But if I walk on stage and try to become, a cabaret band, trying to just please the audience, make them feel good by saying, everybody put your hands up, clap your hands, sing along in the choruses. That's not my style. I don't do that. I think that's kind of tacky. It's a sellout. It's showbiz. I think you can make an audience happy by bringing them to you in a more subtle way. You don't have to, everybody sing. You don't need to do that stuff. That's just, it makes me laugh when I've seen this for all of my life. I've seen other bands, and sometimes when playing at festivals, you see the band is coming on, getting the audience to clap along with the song, and I'm thinking, okay. I mean, I have done that, but only 10 seconds, and then I don't want them to do it anymore because they're going to clap out of time anyway and it will upset me. So I like the audience to enjoy it in a more subtle way. My belief is the musicians on stage have got to be selfish about what they do and be honest about what they do. That is what impresses an audience, not when you try too hard to make the audience happy. I mean, it's like sex. If you're going there to make your partner just feel terrific and you don't really enjoy it, then there's no point. You can't be completely selfish. You've got to give something, but you've got to do it in a way that makes everybody feel good. You've got to convey that this is a passionate, wonderful moment that you're having, as well as making the other person happy. And I think it's the same in music. There's no point in being a good actor and faking the orgasm to make the other person happy. You've really got to let them know you're having the orgasm. You're the one who's having this passionate moment on stage, singing something that maybe you've sung 1,000 times before, and this is 1,001, but it's still something really exciting, and you just get angry, you get crazy about it, you get focused. It's all this emotion. You've got to do it for you, and be real about it. That's the important thing. And when you can't do that anymore, it's time to stop. In reference to other things that I've done, I mean, from 1978 until I guess about the year 2000, I was pretty involved with aquaculture. But it wasn't something I did every day. I mean, I employed 400 people to work in the fish farms and in the factories. I would get involved for 5 minutes of a day, or 1 or 2 hours in a week. Most of my life, music is what I do. That's my main job. I'm no longer involved in aquaculture or fish farming. That came to an end over the last 5 years, just progressively. So I don't do that anymore. I'm involved with environmental stuff, and particularly wild cats. That's something I get involved with because Sting is too busy saving the rainforests. He has no time for the small wildcats. Elton John is a great guy, but he's way too busy with AIDS and, raising money and charitable great work. So he has no time for the wildcats. Nobody has any time for the small wildcats. So I'm happy I have it's like being the flute player, it's like you can be a big fish in a small pool. I'm the flute player in rock. I'm the guy who gets involved with the small wildcat species. Not big ones. Lions and tigers, they're scary. They could bite my head off. I mean, like Roy, I don't want to get messing with those big cats. They're too scary. So I'm interested in the small wildcats. 26 species of small wildcat on planet Earth. Many of them are endangered. And since Sting is too busy with rainforest, then I figure, I shouldn't be doing rainforest. That's Sting's job. I will do the small wildcats. So I do a little bit of, kind of raising money for scientific expeditions and, sometimes help out some of the zoos that depend on private funding, from individuals to build a new enclosure for breeding some of the endangered species, and just something I do a little bit. And it's as boring as Sting's rainforests. It's as boring as most people who do charitable kind of work. It should be a private passion, something they do in a private way in their life, and shouldn't talk about it too much. So I've already said enough. I just do a little. I don't put millions of dollars into this. I just do a little bit every year. I do a few things, and it's just nice to be involved with something. It's not people. I could be, making the same effort and be concerned with, like Bono, with with the big picture of major issues, debt cancellations. I could be involved in humanitarian work in some African country. I could be, right now I could be in the Maldives or in Thailand, being involved in the aftermath of the tsunami thing. But I don't. I choose my effort, and that's what I do. It's not perhaps as important to most people, but it's important to me, because I know there's right now probably 100 people on our planet who are actively involved in small wildcat conservation. So to me, I'm one of those 100 people. Scientists, environmentalists, conservation people, important people. You will never hear of their names. They just work quietly doing something that is of no interest to most people in the public. But it's of interest to me, and that's why I do it. But I think that musically, life, as the song says, life is a long song. Or Locomotive Breath is a classic Jethro Tull song about this journey through life. You're out of control. Someone else is driving. Someone else is in charge of the engine, and you are just a passenger, and you have no control over the destination. You just have to stay on the train. You can't get off. I make these references in songs, and I think they're pretty good, obvious metaphors. They're not particularly clever, but they're good. They're still valuable to me. That I think these are meaningful statements about how, when I was, 22, 23 years old, that's what I was trying to say. Now that I'm 57 years old, it's still what I'm trying to say. I think they're pretty good metaphors, and they're pretty good songs, because they get to the point. They make the message clear, and I haven't really changed my feelings, my experience, and my views of some of these things is very much the same. Like religion, I've always been a very tolerant person. I've always enjoyed the differences between Jewish people and Muslims and Christians and Hindus. I enjoy the differences. I don't want everybody to be the same. I want to celebrate the differences in culture, in religion, in music. The fact that these things sometimes are seemingly opposing each other, it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to enjoy, that the contrast, the contradictions, it's something to enjoy about life, and to be not suspicious or afraid or want everybody to be in the same image. I mean, I'm not here telling the world that they should all be part of a democratic society. There are certain people in the world today who believe that their mission in life is to make the whole planet a democracy. But you can't achieve that in 4 years. Or another 4 years. You can't achieve that in another 4 lifetimes. because certain people in certain parts of the world have no concept. They live in a feudal or tribal community where democracy as an idea is something that it's a foreign language. It has no relevance. There are people in Russia who feel life is a lot worse now that Russia seemingly is a democratic nation. They feel a lot more unhappy now than they did in the times of the Soviet Empire. Democracy is a dangerous mission to be on in life. And I'm not here musically to preach one thing. I'm just here to enjoy the fact that we're all different and that we should be tolerant and accepting of differences. As long as no one gets hurt too often, then I don't believe in trying to bend people to fit a certain set of rules. And musically, that's my mission in life, is to make it as colourful and as broad as I can, to introduce people to different sounds, different voices, different references. If I can make people interested in the differences that are around us, then that's something makes me feel good. If all I do is reinforce one stereotype, then I'm not so happy. No offence to Status Quo, fine band, but if all I had spent the last 37 years doing was shaking the hair I don't have anymore, then it would be okay, but it's not what I'm capable of. More variety in my what I bring to people, and so that's my mission in life, is to try and explore the boundaries of what we call rock music. Whether critics might say, "Oh, Jethro Tull, yeah, the folk rock band from the 70s," or the blues band from the 60s, or the classic rock band, or the art rock band. I mean, we get called everything. Some of the names are, in fact, quite polite. And the only one I really have a problem with is Jethro Tull, the prog rock band. That makes me a little nervous, because I don't think we're really a prog rock band. But Jethro Tull is all these different things to different people. They're all true, and yet none of them are true, because we're not as simple as just fitting into one little box. And that is our strength and our weakness at the same time.
Anderson, thank you for letting us listen to you.
No problem. I could go on forever, which I'm sure would not be a good idea. It's time to quit and listen to the music.